बिस्मिल्लाहिर्रहमानिर्रहीम, अस्सलाम वालेकुम। मैं हूँ कैसर अहमद राजा। उम्मीद है आपकी तबीयत बिल्कुल ठीक होगी। आज हमारे साथ एक ऐसे गेस्ट हैं, आमतौर हम कहते हैं कि किसी तारुफ के मोहताज नहीं हैं, एंड ये जुमला बजाते खुद इतना आम हो गया है कि लोग सोचते रहते हैं पता नहीं किसकी बात हो रही है। बट आई प्रॉमिस यू आई वॉन्ट डू दैट टू यू। मेरे साथ वाकई ऐसे गेस्ट हैं जो किसी तारुफ के मोहताज नहीं हैं, लेकिन ये रस्म दुनिया है कि कुछ इब्तदाई कलमात ज़रूर कहे जाते हैं। हमज़ा tzortzis मेरे साथ आज हैं। इंटरनेशनली इनके काम को एक्नॉलेज किया जाता है, इंटरनेशनली अक्लेम्ड पोलेमिसिस्ट हैं, और हमारे इस्लामी दुनिया में जो एक मॉडर्न हमें जो एक अफ्रंट का हमें सामना करना पड़ता है, वी अंडरस्टैंड कि जो रवायती तरीक़ाकार है वो इतना फ़ाल अब नहीं रहा, तो उसके लिए हमें नए प्रोग्रेसिव थॉट आइडियाज़ और उनको प्रेजेंट करने के जो तरीके हैं वो चाहिए। एंड हमज़ा इज़ राइट एट द फोर फ्रंट ऑफ इट। तो उनसे आई बात होगी। यहाँ तक जो बात थी ये उर्दू में है, इसके आगे इंग्लिश होगी। You all are very well educated, so I don't think that will be a problem. But if there are any questions, कोई भी सवाल अगर उसमें फिर भी होते हैं तो आप कमेंट्स में लिख सकते हैं। मैं अपनी बेहतरीन कोशिश करूँगा कि मैं आप तक मैं आऊँ अगर कोई चीज़ की अगर हमें कोई समझ में आती है। ब्रदर हमज़ा, अस्सलाम वालेकुम सर।
Walaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
What a pleasure and honor it is for me, sir.
No, it's the pleasure's all mine.
You're so very kind.
That was very poetic Urdu. I don't know Urdu, but it sounded very nice.
It's probably a genetic problem I have. I speak this way, irrespective of the language. At least I try. But
It's very nice, very professional.
No, that's very kind of you. Well, thank you for giving us your time. Now, you are very well known for your debates, and as a polemicist, the amount of traveling you have to do and different types of people you see, but mostly it is the barrage of criticism that comes against Islam, and people try to confuse the Muslim youth, the different levels, and that you and your organizations, the Sapien Institute, IRA, and a number of other organizations you work for or with, you have created a very good defense mechanism against that. And that is something that we do here in Pakistan as well. But as a matter of strategy, I am of the opinion that enough of the defense, let's go on front foot. What's your take on it?
I agree. So when I was engaging in martial arts, there was this kind of idea that the best form of defense is to attack. Because if you know there is an attack that is coming, or they're planning an attack, the best way to defend yourself is to attack first.
There you go. And that's exactly is what's going to be theme of this conversation, now that we understand each other, right? It's the attack.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I mean, some people are starting to do this now in the online sphere, not everybody.
Yeah.
And I do believe that going on the attack is far more powerful.
Yeah.
For example, sometimes there's this argument that they say Islam needs reform. In actual fact, someone raised that type of question at one of the universities in the UK. Islam needs reform.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, let's assume it does.
Yeah.
Reform to what? What do you have? Tell me. What set of the disputatious set of doctrines of liberalism do you want us to adopt?
Exactly.
What form of liberalism? Tell us what normative ethical theory you want us to adopt. Which one? Is it coherent? Tell me. So what that does, it puts them on the back foot.
Exactly.
And even if they adopt any certain position, then you just basically raise certain questions. And you say, hold on a second, do you know that there's a problem here?
Yeah.
There's a philosophical problem here.
Yeah.
There is a social problem here. Or there is a problem of incoherence here.
Yeah.
How are you going to justify that? So what you do now, you put them underneath the microscope.
Yeah.
And then what you do, you use their kind of skepticism against them.
Yeah, exactly. And that is arguably one of the best ways, because it's also intellectually honest, because this is how you engage in a conversation. I mean, it could only go for so long with the structure that you criticize and I defense. That's not the rules of the game. I mean, fair enough, it's your right to criticize me and my religion. I'd welcome you to do that, because Islam has presented its case to people based on rationality and intellect. So sure, it is open to criticism. By all means, you do that. But don't just think that that's the only thing which is going to happen.
The door swings both ways.
Exactly.
Yeah,
And
it's not only one way.
It will. So let's attack atheism, shall we?
Sure.
I have a question for you. There was a time when one would ask, what is atheism? And it would be a simple one-line answer. This is atheism. You don't believe in God, namely, that's atheism. But what has happened to atheism that the meaning is keep on shifting and evolving and new ideas coming to it, that the very simple thing, or at least what ought to be a very simple thing, what is atheism? Now if you talk to 10 different atheists, you can at least 6 or 7 different answers. What has gone wrong with atheism?
It was a good question, but I would say is that question assumes that there was something right in the beginning.
Oh, nothing. But at least there was coherent enough to say.
Sure. I mean, I mentioned this in my book when I tried to define atheism.
Yeah.
And I appreciate that in academic discourse, the academics mention there is no consensus on a definition.
Exactly.
And so what I do, I use a kind of practical approach to define atheism.
Yeah.
So I give like 3 kind of categories. And they're not academic definitions, but it's like, okay, on the ground,
What
functionally,
we see, sure.
practically, what does it mean? And you have the type of atheist that is a social atheist, meaning they have no idea why they're rejecting God.
Yeah.
They're just doing it because of social conformity, because they have a need to belong. And this is part of, social psychology.
Sure.
It's normative social influence. You have a need to belong, so you connect with the dominant group. And if your dominant group or subgroup is secular atheist, then you're going to connect with them because you're human, you have a need to belong.
Yeah.
So there's a social type of atheist, right? I remember it was the Australian Atheist Convention or something. There was a lady who stood up and said, I'm an atheist because this is my, kind of lifestyle. That's what I want it to be.
Yeah.
Something like that. There was no intellectual arguments or any kind of philosophical reasoning. The other kind of category was a positive atheist. Now, I don't mean that like, they're an atheist and they think,
Positive in terms of knowledge claim.
Positive thinking. No, it's more of that they have a knowledge claim.
Sure.
So they say there is no God, meaning that they think they have positive arguments against God's existence.
Yeah.
Or positive arguments for atheism, meaning for the fact that there are no gods or a God or a intervening God.
True.
Which they're quite rare, that bunch, They may use the problem of evil, but I don't think that's a philosophical argument. Fundamentally, it's an emotional one, especially the way atheists articulate it, because they have to produce a strong man. They have to misrepresent the Islamic conception of the divine in that argument. Anyway, the other one is a negative atheist, which is they don't really have arguments against God, but they're not convinced with the arguments for God.
Yeah.
So this is not a type of atheism. They don't believe in God for sure, but it's more skepticism because it assumes that they're willing to listen to an argument. If a good argument comes their way, then they'll adopt it, right? So this assumes a form of skepticism.
Yeah, sure.
Now these are not exclusive. You could be a bit of both at different, at different levels, if you like.
Yeah.
So I think that's the best way from an Islamic perspective, an apologetics perspective, to engage with the idea of atheism.
Yeah.
Because you could fit any atheist in those 3 categories. Any loose categories.
True.
They're functional and practical. To go into the kind of academic discussion of definitions, that can be sometimes unhealthy.
Yeah.
Especially if you want to win someone's heart over, like you want to win them over. But I do believe it's also very powerful as well, because when they don't even know what atheism is, then you could say to them, sort your house out first and come back to me later. So I do agree.
Yep.
But that would be my kind of approach. Like, for example, yesterday at LUMS, I spoke about philosophical naturalism. I said many atheists, don't like to be called philosophical naturalists.
Yeah.
Okay, fine. But if it looks like a duck, and it quacks like a duck, then it's an atheist. Then it is a duck, right?
Yeah.
So, and I said, you could ask them questions. Do you believe in the divine? God? No. Do you believe in supernatural? No. Do you believe in the non-physical? No. Do you believe that all phenomena could be reduced or explained by physical processes?
Yeah.
Yes. Well, you're a philosophical naturalist.
That's what
what
exactly
so
means.
Sometimes we have to use emotional intelligence and be aware that don't use the labels, but ask questions. So that would be my type of approach, but I do see where you're coming from, that if you can expose the fact that there's an incoherence or that they cannot even define what atheism is, then do they even have an argument? What are they arguing for or against?
Exactly. If the base premise is collapsed, and the very fact that you as the Muslim have to define what atheism is for them, well, the battle is already lost for them. if you really think about it. And I've had over 50 hours live stream, so with the settings of sort of 7 hours and 5 hours and 6 hours in those pieces. Marathons, yes. And the name was Convinced Me on Atheism. And I very intentionally put it on atheism, not off atheism. So don't tell me that your religion is wrong, therefore the default position of atheism is right. Now, tell me something good about atheism. And after over 50 hours in which we had Pakistani atheists and Indian, then the British, and then the Canadian, and so forth, they couldn't even agree between themselves as to what atheism is.
Wow.
So there would be a guy who would say atheism is a philosophy of life. Another person would say, no, it's just the rejection of theism. And you see, my problem with this entire idea is that for them to sit at the helm and say that, well, because you're wrong, therefore I'm right, from there to here in which they have to explain what is right in atheism, and there is nothing right in atheism. Because you see, when you say Islam is wrong, you have to explain what exactly do you mean by that. Is it the economical system of Islam which is criticizing, or the family system, or the political system? Islam is a way of life, and when you say it's wrong, there has to be something there. And when you say something is wrong, two things are necessarily required. Number one, you know the difference between right and wrong. And number two, you are standing on the right, therefore you can call something else wrong. So you as an atheist, if Islamic economic system is wrong, what is your economic system? What is your political system?
Absolutely.
I mean, what is your family system? You have nothing to offer apart from one thing, and that is you're wrong. Well, that intellectually is just not good enough. So I think the battle is already lost so far as they're concerned.
Of course, even when they say they don't believe, it's a rejection of theism.
Yeah.
And you ask them, okay, what theism? What type? What conception? Oh,
Exactly.
I don't believe in a God or intervening God or gods. Okay, what do you mean by God? What God are you rejecting? Maybe I'm rejecting the same one as you, right?
Yeah.
Because sometimes atheists, they have a conception of God that is shirk, is polytheistic.
Exactly.
You know, some of them say, I don't believe a God in the sky with a beard. Okay.
Yeah, we're on the same page.
We're on the same page. So, okay, let's have a conversation. So your approach is fantastic. In actual fact, I've been trying to adopt that type of approach for the past few years. And I think this approach, by the way, comes with maturity, intellectual maturity. By the way, I'm not saying I'm intellectually mature.
You are.
I might say you're intellectually mature.
No, so
and I'm agreeing with you, because even when someone who was like I think me and Qaiser Ahmed, may Allah bless him, we were doing a live stream together, and one of these kind of polemical, liberal, politically liberal guys were trying to challenge me. Yeah. And I was just listening and asking questions. Okay, tolerance, okay. Do you believe there's a boundless tolerance? No. Okay, so there's a boundary to tolerance. Okay. So who has the right to put those boundaries in place? Yeah. And then so you start, articulating yourself, right? And start asking them questions by putting them on the back foot and exposing the philosophical holes. That is probably the most strongest way of dealing with it, because at best or at worst what can happen is that they would agree that they have issues, philosophical issues, they are intellectually incoherent, and then they may not agree with the Islamic position, but at least they don't have that grounding or that strength anymore, perceived strength to attack. Because they have their own issues to deal with.
Exactly.
So at least in their eyes, we bring Islam from the bottom where they thought it was to at least on their level. And if we've done that, we've already won. Because their whole game is based on you guys are wrong, you guys are medieval, you guys are backward, you guys are incoherent, you guys are backward, and so on and so forth. But this approach, the least that the worst outcome is that it's on the same level playing field. And if you do it properly, we'll show Islam to be superior anyway, because Islam has an intellectual foundation that is true. We could, defend our premises, we could ground our assumptions, and so on and so forth. So I do appreciate this approach. It's actually the new phase of dawah.
And I think this is much needed. I hope that us as a paradigm we can create this. You say it's a very interesting thing that apart from us Muslims, nobody as a system has actually put atheism to a test. By that, I don't mean that other people haven't, but they've been some amazing individuals. For example, in Christianity, some very good philosophers, and in Judaism, some very good philosophers and theologians, they have done so, but not as a system, as individuals they have. And this probably is one of the reasons of the arrogance behind atheism. And if I can put it this way, atheists, they demolished Christianity, that's a fact. In Europe, in West, they have done so. And somehow it gave them the idea that we can do the same thing to Islam. No, you cannot. And there's a reason for it. In Christianity, you have a significant disparity between the belief and the nature of the God and the belief you attribute. The characteristics, for example. And it's easy to deconstruct them, and it's easy to say that you're wrong. Obvious example would be, as a Christian, one would say that God is omnipresent, is present everywhere. But if the God is present everywhere, then that God cannot have his Son, because if the God is there already, then where does the Son fit in? And if we accept that argument, then how do we justify the killing of the Son? And if your argument is that no, the God has now two versions, there's a God which is present everywhere, and then there is Son which is confined, but even the Son is confined, is still everywhere. Sure, let's run with this argument. If that Son is at one place and is everywhere as well, once that Son is killed at one place, then it necessarily follows that the God is dead everywhere, because the same Son is everywhere. So the belief of God having the Son is inconsistent with the attributes of the God being omnipresent. That's just one example, and any atheist could come and can shred this to pieces. No matter how big a philosopher or theologian you are, you'd struggle that. In Islam, we don't have that.
Yes.
We have Qul huwallahu ahad.
Absolutely.
There is no son. There is no wife. And I guess atheists, they came with this arrogance that we can do the same thing to Islam.
Yes.
But then Islam put atheism to a test to the extent that now the atheism, they're having to find new definitions and the justification of their existence and so forth.
Yes, they had to up their game. I mean, new atheism is dead.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah,
irrespective of what was exactly new in new atheism.
To the point where thinkers today or people who are popular online, they are looking at new atheism as some kind of historical thing, a failing. So from that perspective, I think we, as a community, we had a relatively good defense to new atheism. So now it's articulating itself in different ways.
Yeah.
And now I have a hunch now that they're using now liberalism and these ideologies as a pathway to atheism.
Yeah.
So atheism is like end product, or it's the end destination, it's the end of the road. And they're using liberalism and they're using these isms as even feminism as a pathway to atheism, which is something that we're not really dealing with, generally speaking, as a collective. And there's an overemphasis on atheism. I think we should emphasize on the path to atheism.
I couldn't agree more.
And I think Professor John Gray, he makes a similar argument about the new atheist movement. It was just basically riding the wave of liberalism, right? So we have to be aware of that. And if we are kind of sincere and cognizant of this, then we have to amend our strategies slightly.
Brother, you're so right on this. In fact, let me add to your point through an historical example. In the West, people were Christians mostly, and now most of them are atheists. At least in practical terms, they are. But that switch didn't happen overnight. It wasn't the case that now you're a Christian and now you're an atheist. There was the pathway in between. The 18th century deism is directly responsible for creating that pathway, because the materialistic thinkers, they started to bring the conceptual notion of transcendence within the human reasoning. When you call something transcendence, it has there's a reason it's called transcendence, that it is above and beyond. You can have the understanding of its existence, but there is no way by which you can comprehend it. That's why it is transcendent. And When you try to confine all of its interpretation to human intellectual faculties and the reasonings, then very soon you will lose the distinction between what is transcendent and what is immanent. And pathway of that then is to atheism. And that is how you inevitably move towards the atheism. And you're absolutely right. Because nobody questioned deism to the extent that it should have been, therefore Christianity using that pathway became into atheism.
That's a good argument. Another argument is the Reformation. So Professor John Charvet, in his book, The Liberal Project and Human Rights, I think it's called, he was I'm not sure if he's alive still, he was from the London School of Economics. And the professor argues in his introduction that there was a need for thinkers to move away from God's perceived will for society. So that people had to become atomized, or it was like almost the birth of the basis of liberalism, which is to atomize society or to give primacy to the individual. Because it's not about God's will anymore, it's about you as an individual. And they felt that was the only way to basically transcend, you know, the religious wars, the 80-year wars, the 30-year wars, the massacre on St. Bartholomew's Day, and all of that stuff that was happening. Obviously, it wasn't just about religion. There was trade rights going on, I believe. There were so many different issues, but generally speaking, there was a move away from the Catholic Church and the Catholic doctrine. And you had, what's his name? I forgot his name. Luther, right? He pinned on a church door in Wittenberg his thesis attacking the Catholic Church, right? And, you know, that was a key milestone as well. And we know the history. But the point is, generally speaking, the thinkers had to move away from, you know, God's will, perceived will for the collective, and to say, right, it's about the individual now. So that was like kind of the birth of individualism or atomism, or the primacy of the individual, which is notwithstanding the disputatious set of doctrines that make up liberalism. That is a kind of basis of liberalism. I don't think there'll be any thinker or philosopher worth the salt. They would not disagree with the fact that liberalism is premised on the primacy on the individual.
Oh, that's the core.
And that was actually critical, because therefore it's about me now, my individual rights. I'm, you know, the kind of assumption of liberalism is I own myself as well. I'm rational, right? I have self-ownership. Therefore, I could have my own conception of the good life. I don't need God's conception anymore. It's just me. So that was like the pathway to liberalism. That's the pathway to removing God away from the public sphere, the social sphere. And then people would have this collective consciousness of, we don't need any God anymore. Maybe at home when we pray or light a candle, but in real life, in practical life, we don't need God. So that itself was part of, you know, is part of the process of making people atheists. Because if people really believe God is unnecessary now, then they'll start to disbelieve in him. And that's why liberalism, or at least the birth of liberalism, and its continuation is responsible to some degree. It's multi-causal, and I agree that the deism is also a factor. I think one could argue it's also the idea of atomizing the individual, the primacy of the individual. Liberalism itself has been responsible.
It's all interlinked. I mean, they don't operate in isolation. These theories.
But I think the point that we're trying to make is what we just said earlier, which is, we need to focus on the pathway to atheism, which are these isms.
Oh, true. I mean, the point I'm making is that what deism did back in days is probably now comes in a different form, i.e. liberalism, i.e. individualism, which is again pathway to the atheism. And you're absolutely right on so far as the individualism and liberalism is concerned, that, you know, typically speaking, the social contract in a collectivist society is that you are part of a bigger system. Within that, you have your individual freedom. And liberalism's individuality is completely different. So the default position is not that you're part of a bigger system and within that you have your individual systems. Their default position is that you start as the individual and then you create a contract with the society. The danger with this idea is that, look, if you are part of a system already, then the system will tell you what your freedoms are. And that's how everybody gets on. And that's everybody is nice and there are no problems. But if you switch that by saying that, look, the default position is that I am the individual and then I'm creating a social contract with the society, that means it's in your hands to withdraw that contract at any time. That's where terrorism comes in. That's where crime comes in. That's where your individual, whatever you want to do to a society comes in, because you have the power of removing that contract. And that is so against the human nature. Mind you, we are group species. And when you live in groups, you have to have terms and conditions. You have to have systems by which you build communities and so forth. It's no system can flourish if you take the natural habitat of that system away from it. I mean, liberalism to me is just like asking the fish that you are trapped in the water. You have the individuality, leave the water. Well, if you remove the natural habitat from that fish, well, you're going to kill. And that is exactly why the Western societies, I mean, if you look at the book, Death of the West, it directly pinpoints the ideas of individualism and liberalism, which is causing the death of the West. And there's a remarkable sentence in there which implies that there are only two things in the West that are responsible for this massive population decline in the West: Black Plague and liberalism. And if liberalism can be counted with Black Plague, well, I mean,
yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're right. This reminds me of a statement by Professor Marilyn Friedman. She's actually a feminist philosopher.
She is, yeah.
But she makes a really good point. She says that individualism, which one would argue is the premise of liberalism, is seeing the self as an abstract entity devoid of social obligations and attachments.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, from an ontological perspective, meaning the source and nature of what it means to be human, liberalism has fundamentally got it wrong.
Yeah.
Because when we're born into a family.
Yeah.
The way we learn is also through social play and social interactions.
Yeah.
Most of our perceived successes and things that we do is as a result of variables that are independent to us, that are outside of our control.
Yeah.
We are inevitably linked to other individuals in society.
Yeah.
Which goes to show the incoherence of liberalism, or the premise of liberalism. But one would argue, look, this was a European problem. And the arrogance of the European thinkers, or at least the arrogance of some liberals today, they think it's universal.
No.
Because they had a problem with the Catholic Church, because they had this specific European historical problem, the wars, the need to individualize the human, and so on and so forth, then they now think, okay, this applies to the rest of the world. Hold on a second. This is a specific European problem. Don't give us your historical baggage.
Yeah.
We didn't have those problems.
Yeah.
The Islamic civilization did not have those problems.
Exactly.
So why are you now, exporting it sometimes at the bar, with the barrel of the gun, to the rest of the world? This is ridiculous.
Let me build a case on this. But one of the reasons I am so adamant that we have to resist liberalism in our societies is because of the word you use, export. In the West, I have no delusion that the political liberalism is on decline. Liberal democracies are on decline since 2006. Consistently, every year, liberal democracies are on decline. Now, when we say liberalism, obviously there is a political liberalism, there is a social liberalism, there is economic liberalism, i.e. the capitalism and so forth. I think the social liberalism will stay in the West for some time, but the political liberalism is on decline. We can see the examples of it in Italy, Poland, Hungary, Austria. Powerful populist governments have come forward in resistance to liberalism. Reason is because when the social liberalism becomes a paradigm, what happens after that is people start to enjoy their life. That has an impact on the population. That declines, that the immigration is needed. For example, typically speaking in the West, you've got 4.8 people needed per pensioner to support the life after pension and the health system and so forth. The fertility rate, at least 2.1 per woman, is required to keep the population sustained. The highest at the moment is in France, which is 1.9, which is the highest is below what is required. And at the lower end of the spectrum, Italy, Spain, they're at 1.2, 1.3 in that region. When people see that mass immigration is coming in, that makes them feel very uncomfortable. So they start to resist in the political sphere, and that's where the populism rises. In your country, in UK, for example, the Brexit. In France, we have Le Pen's government, and we have the Swedish Democrats, which is a Nazi offspin, basically, a spin-off, apologies. That is resisting against the liberalism, which is the result of the social liberalism. And liberals are very cunning. So what they are doing is they have started to see new avenues for it. Countries with mass populations in Africa, in Asia, countries like Pakistan, for example. And it's easy to sell liberalism in countries where that are economically weak, because when you are not financially strong as an individual, then it's easy to buy another idea, because when you are not financially secure, everything else becomes so weak with it. Iman becomes weak with it. People start to make compromises here and there. So they have started to export the very product that has caused the demise of the West into Pakistan and India and other Asian and African countries. So the word export is very powerful. And we are standing here to say, no, you can't export it. The alternative is, okay, if we can't export it, let's smuggle it. And we say, we won't let you do that either. So at the moment, our universities in Pakistan, the media is at the moment is under serious attack of liberalism. And we are building up an academic resistance against it.
Yeah,
no violence, no abuse. Yeah,
I've seen it. I was in a particular university yesterday. Yeah. And some of the events that they have, you don't even see those events in the UK.
True.
Like, it was like in the Muslim world to have an event
it's not even
that is called Why Period Art Matters.
Yeah.
And when we talk about period from the point of view of a historical phase of time, we're talking about the biological period, the menses of a woman. It's insane. Like some of the other events that I've seen, it's insane. And I was trying to articulate to the audience, you know, these notions of freedom and individual rights. Come on, don't allow them to force this down your throats without any critical thinking. You think there's only one conception of rights and freedom? This is a university, for God's sake. Have you studied this? I mean, don't let them get away with this.
Oh, no.
Like, for example, I was saying to them, like, even the notion of freedom, if you study the idea of freedom on an academic level, you would see that freedom is essentially the absence of coercion. Then you need to ask yourself the question, what is coercion? Is it just about being forced to do something? Not necessarily. And you need to read the book by Whitehammer called Coercion. I think he just basically solved the issue. I don't think there is any other book after his that would actually deal with the concept of coercion. Anyway, to cut a long story short, it's not about just being forced to do something, because there are situations that you have no other plausible option. And you wouldn't say that now your freedom's curtailed, right? So it's more than just being forced to do something or not having an alternative option, right? So coercion is essentially the violation of your rights. Okay? So therefore freedom is the non-violation of your rights. So not being free or having your freedom curtailed is the violation of rights. Okay. What conception of rights? The positive, the negative? Tell me.
And determined by who?
Yes, and determined by who? So obviously from an Islamic perspective, we say Allah has the right to give us our rights. And all those positions have metaphysical commitments. And we would say, bring it on. We have the correct metaphysic.
Exactly.
We could prove God's existence. We could prove the prophethood of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and we could prove the Quran, and it becomes the truth. And what becomes from truth is true.
Yeah.
So we can ground our intellectual foundations. We have intellectual veracity. Yeah. Whereas what about you? So I was trying to say to them, don't just allow them to use these slogans and they think they're intellectual and it's come from the West and they're smart and it's about your freedom. No. What conception of freedom? In our context, what we've just discussed, what conception of rights?
Exactly.
And who has the right to decide? So I was trying to get them to critically think, because what's happening in, unfortunately, Pakistani universities, Pakistan, for God's sake, bro, the place of La ilaha illallah. If you study the thinkers in the 20s or 30s, Pakistan wasn't just for Muslims who were living in subcontinent or Muslims that were living in the Punjab area. It was for the Ummah.
Absolutely.
It was an Ummatic project.
It is.
Pakistan's my country.
Absolutely.
I'm a Muslim, this is my country.
Absolutely.
Yeah? And if you look at the partition in 1947, it was horrid, because as a result you had the mass migration. People were massacred, sisters were raped, coming from one part of India going all the way to Pakistan, for that hope that they could express themselves and live under Tawheed. People need to realize this, And now you're allowing these incoherent ideas and assuming that they have these universal truths and they're forcing it down your throats, which is aimed to destroy you and your society. It's aimed to individualize you to the degree that you're going to take your mother and your father when they get older to glorified concentration camps. That's what they do in the UK. They leave their old parents to old people's home. This is a concentration camp. This is not Pakistan. We live with our families. We have community. But this is what's going to happen. This is what they want. But they want to individualize, atomize our societies. And unfortunately, because we have an inferiority complex, we're suffering from post-colonial trauma. A lot of these youth, because a lot of them come from the secular elites, they're like, oh, this is liberation. Liberation from what? And to what? You're being enslaved by your own ego and by false narratives and by ideologies that have not served the West well. Social fragmentation and decay, destruction of the family, destruction of necessary moral hierarchies that have served humanity well. What are you talking about, you pseudo-intellectual? And come on, man. Sorry for the rant, but
no, you're
come on,
right.
We need to...
Well, let me add something to it.
Please.
This, what we call these elites, right? They are intellectually in a state of destitute to the extent that they actually think that going to McDonald's is a status symbol. I'm not joking.
Or were opened recently in Lahore. What's that Canadian coffee shop called?
Tim Hortons.
Tim Hortons.
People actually dressed up.
They dressed up.
Sorry, guys at Tim Hortons, I'm sorry, but even you were surprised, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Somebody would actually dress up to come to Timmy's. Anyway.
Some of these people need an intellectual tappar. Honestly, that's what they need, an intellectual tappar.
That's
like wake up. Like, what's wrong with you? And even if you adopt the ideas, you think you think that they're going to love you?
Yeah.
You brown man, brown woman, you think they're going to respect you still and see you as an equal?
Yeah.
I mean, learn from history. Come on. Like, I know, look, we're supposed to come across as intellectual on this podcast here, but sometimes you just have to call a spade a spade.
Exactly.
Yeah?
It is exactly.
These people are pseudo-intellectuals.
Yeah.
When they even engage in a debate on this discussion, they have no arguments.
Yeah,
they don't even know their tradition properly. There were people in the university I was the other day, Lums, who were possibly atheists or liberals. They didn't even know their own tradition. I had to correct them on certain things. Like, come on. I mean, they have to realize... And look, we have to be empathic as well. We have to realize as well that there was a game that's being played in Pakistan. Yeah. There are so many bright, intelligent, nuanced du'at like yourself, mashallah, and mashayikh who know the deen. They know how to articulate themselves eloquently in a modern way, but they're not given platform. In the liberal media in Pakistan, especially with showing this stuff to the elite children or youth or young adults, you usually have a man with a suit and a tie, clean shaven, articulate, and he's saying things that are extremely secular and liberal. And then opposing him is, with all due respect, a fat Mowgli who doesn't know how to articulate himself properly, is uneducated, doesn't know how to empathize intellectually or emotionally with the target audience. And when you're looking at that, as a young person, who are you going to have an affinity towards?
Oh, it's very carefully constructed.
Yeah, it's carefully constructed. But we need to make them realize this is a game that's being played, because I've traveled to Pakistan, it's my third time here, and I'm telling you, the Pakistani ulama, the Pakistani du'at are intelligent, they know philosophy, they know theology, they're smart, they are articulate, they know how to engage, they know how to articulate themselves. They are going to be the leaders of the ummah. They're just not given platform on these platforms, right? They're not given the right type of platform for those audiences. So I do appreciate why they have this feeling of not having an affinity for Islam or traditional Islam, because obviously their parents as well, they have these kind of, stereotypes or narratives against religious folk. I do understand what's going on, but don't be naive. Have critical thinking. Understand what game is being played here. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. And this is what we try to do when we build the counter narrative. As a matter of jest, I often say that in Pakistan we always get things that are out of date, at least by a couple of generations. And I say this as a matter of jest, but there is some truth to it. So, for example, we have Toyota Corolla and Honda and all that. Say they launch their new cars in Pakistan, but the versions they launch here are already a couple of generations old. So we get 6th generation of whatever, whilst in the rest of the world they've got 8th or 9th generation. Same thing happens in the intellectual world. For example, in Pakistan, this so-called what we call the Desi elite, they think liberalism is the way forward, whereas in the West it has been defeated. So even on that front, they are a couple of generations old in terms of knowledge.
Absolutely.
And that is what we try to explain to them. Hume is particularly helpful in this regard, because it's his idea of when you find the process of something complicated, then just look at the result. And I think that's a beautiful way of looking at things. I say, you may find the process of liberalism beautiful, maybe, but what is the result of it? I mean, I know us, the Muslims, we have flourishing populations, we have dynamic youth, we are deprived of the facilities and opportunities, true, and it's our job to create them in our job. We don't look to the West for them. We have to create our future. It's our job. But going by the international surveys, Pew, for example, by 2050, the whole non-religion, not just the atheists, right, their population will decline somewhere from 16% down to 13%. And with the time, it will decline more. So the point we make to those people that this beautiful process that you're looking for, that you're looking at, it's the result of that is that 500 years down the line, my progeny, my children will still be debating about the global issues, the climate change, other global processes. Yours won't be there. And if this is what you want, if you literally want to walk into an abyss, well, that's your choice. But don't tell us it's a good thing.
Yes.
The point you were making earlier about the Pakistan and the way the type of sacrifices people made for this country. I remember I had a speech at in a convention at Mohsinin, and I was saying exactly the same thing. And I literally, during my speech, I broke down in tears.
You're a very stoic, professional, articulate person. That must have been a serious moment.
It hurts you, brother.
SubhanAllah.
It hurts you because what I was asking people that, look, if I ever see a mother in my dreams who asks me that 2 of my sons were killed during migration in 1947, my daughter was raped, I was raped, and we were killed. For what? For this Pakistan. I would cry because of 2 reasons. Number 1, because of the atrocities they had to endure. And more importantly, because I will not have any answer to her question. Because this is not the Pakistan they suffered for. What did liberals ever do to create this Pakistan? What is their contribution? What have they done apart from just bringing this country down? They have no contribution whatsoever. It is given to them. They are free enough to use abusive language towards this country. They can do it because they're free enough to do it. What is your contribution? What have you ever done? You give us I mean, your biggest argument, oh, you Muslims haven't done anything. Look at the West, they have done all these scientific inventions. Yeah, sure, we thank them that they're serving humanity. What have you done? Name one of your scientific inventions, apart from the fact that you can give us, you can abuse us, you can give us, the derogatory terms you use, and you keep on making a reference to the Western inventions. What is your contribution to science? What is your contribution to philosophy? What is your contribution to the creation of Pakistan? If the answer is nothing, shut up. Let us do our job.
Send them to India, bro.
Oh, the Canada, they had this new project of having 1.5 million immigrants in next 3 years. I actually tweeted, and if I remember correctly, I might be wrong on this, but I think I've also mentioned Canadian embassy, but I don't remember that part exactly. But I did tweet saying that if you are taking people from other countries, please take our liberals, and we are happy to give them to you on no return policy. Please keep them.
Yeah, they should go to India if they want. Look, at the end of the day, you're right. You're so right. I think they may even hate Pakistan. They may even hate what it means to be a Muslim, right?
Yeah.
So I feel you, bro. I echo your sentiments and your emotions, and it's something that we need to work on, and we need to challenge these ideas, because I wanted to mention that, these isms like liberalism, even postmodernism.
Yeah.
From a psychological perspective, I like to see things from a psychological perspective as well.
Yeah.
Why would someone even want to adopt such an idea that is incoherent philosophically?
Yeah.
It doesn't align itself with reality. Why would someone do that? We have to see it from a kind of psycho-emotive perspective. It's literally because they just want to worship themselves. It's ego. I just want to do whatever I want to do. Yeah. The primacy is me. The priority is me, the I.
Yeah.
The celebration of the ego. Yeah. Even in postmodernism is even worse, right? The only truth is me. The only truth is what I say. The only truth is what I identify with, right? Yeah. It is the celebration of the ego, which is very interesting, because there are some philosophers that are talking about this, even from the perspective of love. Yeah. There's a Korean-born German philosopher called Byung-Han Chul, and he wrote the book The Agony of Eros, and he makes a really good point, and he says, we have a narcissistic society. Yeah. And I would argue it's because of these isms, because it focuses on the I.
Exactly.
And even from a psycho-emotive perspective, it's about me, how I identify, my truth, this, that, and the other. Primacy is on me. I'm the priority, no one else, right? There's no social obligations and attachments. Yeah. And he argues that this narcissism makes us end up not being able to love, because to love, you have to appreciate the other as they are. But he's got another book, I think, called The Expulsion of the Other. So essentially he's saying there is no other anymore in this narcissistic world. Yeah. So what you do, you end up projecting yourself onto the other. So therefore you end up loving yourself. Yeah. So you don't have to love anymore. There is no real love in this society anymore.
Solipsism in practice.
It's a loveless society now. There's no true love. Yeah. And there's social fragmentation and decay. Yeah. There's the dismantling of necessary moral hierarchies in our society that have served humanity well. Yeah. And anthropologically, there was this thinker, I forgot the name now. I think her name begins with Hannah, I think. I forgot the thinker. But basically there is an argument that if you look at it anthropologically, generally speaking, anthropologically, societies were always communitarian, or they were in communities. They were not atomized or individualized.
They can't.
Exactly.
That's not their natural habitat.
That's the whole point. And the thinker argues that the process of individualism or atomizing society, breakdown of hierarchies and so on and so forth, this paves the way for totalitarianism. This paves the way to basically abuse humanity. And that's what's happening. Because if you look at liberalism, liberal governments really are no longer liberal, if you think about them, traditionally. Because the liberal government's supposed to be, generally speaking, you don't get involved in people's life and the conception of the good life. That's the whole point. That's like almost classical political liberalism.
Yeah.
That the government has minimal involvement. It doesn't have a conception of the good life.
Yeah.
There is a marketplace of a vacuum of values. There's a marketplace now of competing values. And because individuals are intrinsically rational, then they can make their own mind up, and collectively they'll come to some kind of agreement, which is based on a whole host of assumptions. But the point is, that's the kind of liberal political project. But now, the liberal project is telling you what to believe, what is moral, what you should teach your children, how you should parent,
Yeah.
It's like, subhanAllah.
Yeah, it's
actually no longer liberalism anymore. It's actually totalitarianism, and we don't even understand. We're not getting the picture.
Yeah.
Like even in the UK, they are forcing children to believe in a certain narrative about gender fluidity.
Exactly.
Even traditional liberal media are talking against this. The Guardian, the Telegraph. They're saying, what on earth is going on?
Yeah.
There's an explosion of, I think, young girls thinking that they are non-binary.
Yeah.
They had no idea what was going on. They were just normal, natural human beings.
Exactly.
And now they're being force-fed this ideology, which is child abuse, really.
Yeah.
And people are saying it's totally fine. Many people are just lapping it up because they're sheep. So there are so many examples, even with many of the laws that are happening. These are like traditionally not very liberal laws. It's totalitarianism. But because they've atomized us so much, they've individualized us so much, now they are able to do this. And you know, the trajectory is not very positive. And that's why, wallahi, talking to the brothers and sisters, step up now. People are dying for Islam. They're so thirsty for Islam. They want family back. They want the normal moral hierarchies back. They want, this form of communitarianism back. They want this. They want these timeless principles and values that serve humanity well back.
Exactly.
They want spirituality. They're spiritually thirsty, right? They don't want to worship themselves anymore. They don't want to. They've had enough, I think. Many people are really thirsty for the Islamic worldview and the Islamic value system. It's our chance now, alhamdulillah, when we have a goldmine opportunity to articulate ourselves with hikmah, with wisdom, with rahmah, with mercy, with goodness, and to be committed to human beings' goodness and guidance, and engage with them in that way.
Absolutely.
And just articulate what Islam is about. And I really believe this is the beginning of something amazing, inshallah.
It is natural for people, and essentially people go back to their best, don't they? Well, we make last couple of points since I've taken too much of your time already. So one thing about what I, with respect, call the intellectual quislings, people who are basically sellout. The way in which I explain, and I'll take your view on this as a feedback, that it's all connected with the international liberal order. So we have, for example, powerful Western countries coming and they're turning Middle East into a fireball, and they are killing people. There is no debate on that. But then what do you tell the media? You can't go on and say that, look, we are killing children there because we can. You have to make them look as the villain. They are the bad guys and we are the good guys. And that requires narrative building. That's where the new atheism comes in. That's where the best-selling books comes in. That's where the end of faith and God delusion and all that. So all this can be justified. The reason I call our liberals intellectual quislings is just like quisling, they are siding with the enemy, so to speak. Now, you cannot choose whether this fight should happen or it shouldn't, because it's already there. Your only choice is the side. Which side do you stand with? I detest this idea of we are going to kill you, attack your countries, bombard you, turn you into fireballs, and then we have powerful media and we will make you guys look the villains, the bad guys. Obviously, any person with sane mind would detest that idea. But when I see our liberals saying, oh yeah, by the way, you are killing us and you are pushing us back into the Stone Ages and we are the bad guys, so we are with you on this front. And all of the liberals in Pakistan, they're exactly the same thing. There's no intellectual depth. There isn't. I mean, off the record, we were talking about a couple of people you met at certain university. I won't mention any names, but only yesterday, we had one of the prominent figures in Pakistani radical feminist. She had a podcast and I happened to be at that studio, and they just offered, how about we do together, you and Qaiser together? And he said, Qaiser who? And they mentioned my full name. I said, him? No way, I won't sit with that guy. And the anchor person of the podcast, he came to my office where I was sitting and he was laughing his head off. I said, who are you? You were supposed to be a polite guy. I said, I think I am. I said, she's basically losing her wits the moment I mention your name.
Yeah.
But no, but that's not how I come across.
She's a coward. And most liberals are cowards.
Yeah, they don't engage, right? They don't engage.
Let's be honest, they're
intellectually.
cowards. Because I've had this in my own life. I've debated with many humanist philosophers and liberals, and they also have done the same thing to me.
Yeah.
I won't engage with this guy. There was this humanist liberal philosopher in South Africa. They set up this debate with me. He agreed. They didn't know who the opponent was. They didn't know it was me.
Yeah.
The minute he found out it was me, he pulled out, started saying some nonsense on radio.
Yeah.
These people are cowards. You know why? Because they know their beliefs are not true.
Yeah.
It's just intellectualizing their arrogance, intellectualizing their shahawat, the blameworthy desires, intellectualizing their egos. I know this sounds like a crude response, but I'm telling you, after going into academia, understanding these ideas and analyzing these people's behaviors and the dispositions, I'm forced just to commit to this conclusion, which is you're a pseudo-intellectual, you are a coward, you can't defend your ideas. When someone has strong opposing ideas and can debate and articulate themselves, you don't want to give them platform. That's why you have the council culture. That's why you want to, censor people. And you want to basically get them removed from the social space because you have such an ego and such an arrogance, you're not even willing to discuss. Why? Because you're scared. You want your ego to be dominant. You want your blameworthy desires to be dominant, and you're trying to intellectualize that. And that's why you don't want anyone else. You want your echo chamber. You're a coward, you're a fool, and you need to realize that. And I'm not holding my words back.
No,
and they need to realize this, because at the end of the day, how far are you going to go? How far are you going to go? You're going to become 35, 40, 50. You're going to be on your own with no family. Your liberal friends are going to leave you alone. You're going to be drinking a little wine, eating your cheese, watching your daytime TV. You're going to be crying because you have no family, you have no community, you have no spirituality. And it'll be too late by then. Wake up.
This
Honestly,
is such
what's wrong with people? They need an intellectual tapper.
It's so amazing that only a little while ago I tweeted about this, that our liberals, isn't this amazing that the type of liberalism they want to give to their children, they will be disowned by those very children.
It's self-defeating.
What exactly? So the point I was making, the intellectual quislings who cannot debate with people, cannot engage with people, but they are siding with the people who are directly responsible for killing millions of people. 45% of the people who've been killed in Afghanistan were children, and that's according to United Nations. What would you say to those guys that, look, if you see these liberals who are already sold out their ideology, and they've bought the ideology which is based on the blood and gore violence and the liberal, the dominance of liberal order, when these guys come to you, how should you respond as a university student? What would you say to our students about that?
There's a few things to understand. Depends what the disposition of the student is. If they're Islamically orientated, you need to make them realize that these people are fighting against Allah and His Messenger, really. And if you're going to fight against Allah and His Messenger, you will fail.
You will.
You will. You'll be utterly annihilated and destroyed. So you choose what side you want to be on. Also, if they're on the fence, then you need to unpack that for them and empathize and intellectually empathize and have emotional intelligence and get them to realize why Islam is true. Get them to realize what the purpose of life is. Get them to realize what the wider agenda is. The falsity of the disputatious doctrines of liberalism is incoherent. It's not in line with reality. It's not a representation of the actual state of affairs, what it means to be human, and so on and so forth. And once you do that, then hopefully you could take them on that intellectual and spiritual journey. But fundamentally, people need to realize the promise of Allah is true. And Islam, the truth is going to be victorious. And what is Islam? It's a rahmah, it's a mercy for everybody. It's justice for everybody. It's the best thing for humanity. The Prophet ﷺ was a rahmah to the worlds. And this is what we believe. And we believe every Muslim should be committed to the goodness and guidance of every single human being. We have love for people. It doesn't mean we love everyone, because if you love everyone, you don't love anyone, right?
Exactly.
Because you got hate evil, isn't it? And hate kufr, the rejection of truth. But so there's a difference between love for and love of. We love for people goodness and guidance for everybody, even enemies.
That we do. True.
And that is what love for humanity what you love for yourself means. The hadith in Tarikh al-Kabir narrated by Bukhari, Shaykh Albani said it's authentic. We have the other hadith in An-Nawawi, the Arba'in of An-Nawawi, which is love for your brother what you love for yourself. And An-Nawawi said this also means human brotherhood, but from the point of view of wanting goodness and guidance for them. So we want goodness and guidance for people. And that's what we need to get people to realize. And now is the great opportunity for us to do that, to show that goodness and guidance. And the promise of Allah is true. Islam will be victorious. It's a promise from Allah. Muslims just have to decide: are you going to be on the sidelines? Are you going to be in the arena? It's happening. The victory is haqq, but it's happening. Are you going to be? Do you want to be eligible for that immense reward and mercy?
Exactly.
Or are you going to be on the sidelines?
Very
you make your choice.
It has absolute
May Allah bless
pleasure.
you.
Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.